Hello, Greg. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, coming in loud and clear.
This is August, I think, 18th. No, August 22nd. I'm 4 days behind, 2023. And I just wanted to make a video with you about some things like here's the Kodak family who lived next door to my farm in Tennessee. Eastman Kodak was next door to the farm, the Manning Civil War Ranch in Mossheim, Tennessee, Greenville, Tennessee. And Eastman took all my baby pictures. See, this is Eastman Kodak, and the date on these are 1953. And there's a 4 and a 2 on all my baby pictures. These were taken the day I was born and copyrighted and patented by Eastman Kodak. And the photographer was George Towers in Detroit. And they put a 4-4 down here as I was born in 1953. And then you can see Kodak took all my pictures back then. This is when I was 3 years old, and there's still a 4 and a 2 in 1956. And you see the 4 and the 2 never went away. And that signifies my being kidnapped at 4, tortured and raped, and my twin murdered in Governor Osborne's basement with 4 other families of governors in 1957. And then all the senators know me. Here's a Senate letter. And this is Hugh Squier, president of Hugh Squier Corp. And Bottomline Publishing. And then Bottomline Publishing in my name, I had a civil rights case. This is my copy of the civil rights case, and you see it's quite a lot of correspondence to the Groves family and inside the Pentagon. And you can see this is United States Commission on Civil Rights. And this letter was dated the 23rd of September, 1997, just pre 9/11. My civil rights case you can see it was here. These letters were right in the Pentagon. Huey Squier, see my name over here. And this is 87 here. And I started this case and it ran for 10 years and it ended up in the Pentagon prior to 9/11. And the civil rights case was against the Groves family who built the Pentagon. And the office this civil rights case was in, and you see the paperwork involved in this. I was suing them because they lied to a judge and put a felony on my record with a lie. And at the time, I had 30 corporate attorneys at Bottomline Publishing in New York. And they wouldn't allow me to call my own attorneys. They gave me a lawyer, Miss Groves, who was still in college and wasn't a lawyer yet. They appointed her my attorney, and she wasn't an attorney. And she had no courtroom time or anything. So I started a civil rights case about them not allowing me to call my corporate attorneys and giving me the Groves family from the Pentagon, who were not even attorneys, to handle a case where I wasn't paid a paycheck for quite a few months as I drove a semi across the country. for a Mr. Webb. Well, after that court case, and they left a felony on my record, and I wasn't guilty of anything, I started a civil rights case against the family that built the Pentagon. And this was in the Pentagon on 9/11. And this comes right from the Civil Rights Office in the Pentagon. The Groves family with George Little back then.
Mm-hmm.
They blew that whole case up on 9/11. They actually blew up the Twin Towers. And I have to turn off this Facebook account. They keep disturbing my video here. They'll probably still disturb it. I can't get it completely turned off.
That's all right.
You know, I have 5,000 friends on Facebook always, but none of them help me with my truth about Kennedy's murder or Hoffa. They just want to date me, and I don't date people anymore, because every time I date a woman, the government murders them, hiding
Yeah.
the truth of who really killed Kennedy and Hoffa, and who blew up the Twin Towers on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
This was President Kennedy. Can you see this?
Yeah, clear.
This is my stolen trademark, Bottomline. And this red line was Obama's red line in the sand when he took over the White House. And Obama and Clinton and Tom Garrett, his journalist in the White House, and the Waters family at CBS murdered my attorney and destroyed my income, as on the same day they murdered my wife. And Fletcher Knebbel here, this was President Kennedy's press secretary in the White House when John F. Kennedy was still alive. Well, after Kennedy was murdered, he wrote this book and used my stolen trademark, pointing me out with my next door neighbor, Mr. Nagy, Al Nagy here, owns Nagy Cement on Durham Street. And if you remember, Barr appointed Durham, I think it was Barr. And I grew up next door to Roseanne Barr and Kathy O'Brien when Governor Osborne's family kidnapped me with Camille Sirhan and my identical twin. And they beat my twin to death at Ford, chained next to me. And the people that did that were Long, Wallace, Andrews, Anderson, Hall, Darrell Hall, and the Osborne family. And Osborne was governor of Michigan, and he always ran against my family, Baldwin. And at one point when I was in high school, I had to save Sue Baldwin from being gang raped by the Renegades and the Outlaw Motorcycle Group. And that fits in later in my life when they murdered Jimmy Hoffa. And this book Fletcher Knebbel wrote was after he wrote 7 Days in May. Now, 7 Days in May was written with Charles Bailey. And Charles Bailey was my doctor in Utica, Michigan, when I lived on Durham Street with Victoria. And Victoria was murdered by state policemen and doctors who were paid to murder her in Johnson City, Tennessee, after they murdered her on our Civil War ranch. And she was my third murdered wife, Victoria Mellon. And her father served with Kennedy in the Navy, just like my father served with Kennedy in the Navy. So Kennedy's press secretary used my stolen trademark to point me out to the world with my doctor, Dr. Bailey. And they wrote 7 Days in May. And 7 Days in May, do you know what that book was about, Greg?
No, I don't.
It was about a military coup, a fictional military coup that happened on May 7th. And then, you know, May 7th is my birthday, 7-4. I was born July 4th, 1953. And then every senator and every House of Representatives person in the country knows me because I was active in the 99th, 97th, 98th, 99th, 100th, 101st sessions of Congress, changing the Byrd Convention with Ted Kennedy. And
Yeah.
then this photo was taken by George Towers, and there's 4-4. Twin Towers, 4-4.
Right.
I was kidnapped at 4 with my identical twin, and they murdered my twin. 5 grown men murdered my twin. There's the Kodak Corporation, and nowadays, you know, and it's always us 4 and 2 on all my patented to the patent office.
Yeah.
And it was copyrighted, my baby pictures, because George Washington and the presidents on U.S. money are my relatives.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with Lincoln, Hamilton, Chase, Morgan, Grant. These are all my relatives. I grew up with them, went to school with them. Jackson on the 20 is my great-great-grandfather. Chase on the $10,000 bill, that's my cousin. And then here's all my baby pictures, and all of them got a 4-2, and they're all in the patent office. And gee, 9/11 was a military coup. So they planned 9/11 before the towers were even built, with George Towers and Eastman Kodak. And John Eastman, in Osborne, in Hall, in Stone illegally cut the bone out of my foot when I was 10 years old, as they murdered Kennedy. And he wasn't a doctor. I was taken to a hospital. He pretended he was a surgeon, illegally cut the bone out of my foot, and he was supposed to go to jail for 30 years. They let him out after 10, I think. And I went to the Warren Police Department, and I asked for those records, and they denied them to me as Trump became president. And the very people that cut the bone out of my foot as torture, Stone,
Mm-hmm.
Osborne and Hall, who kidnapped me with Wallace and Long and Anderson and Andrews, who were grown men, and tortured me and beat my twin to death when we were 4 years old with Camille Sirhan from California. In my kindergarten class, they did this to me. They handed me over to Governor Osborne's family with my identical twin. Camille Sirhan was sitting there crying, and they beat my twin to death. Patterson was outside of the office. And who's Patterson? Patterson was giving Bill Clinton with Perry prostitutes as he was governor in Arkansas, correct?
I believe that's the names. Yeah, I think that's right.
Patterson, the same family, was outside of Osborne's house when I escaped them, naked, tortured and raped, and ran across the street bleeding. And L. Brooks Patterson laughed at that scene.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, that same family, Patterson, was giving Clinton prostitutes with Perry. And Perry is my second wife's family, who's still alive. And they covered up the murder of 3 of my wives.
Yeah.
In Greenville, Tennessee, on a Civil War ranch. Mossheim, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And this all goes back to 7 Days in May, written by this President Kennedy's press secretary in the White House. my stolen trademark, my stolen IRS license, my stolen federal publishing license out of Foley Federal Court. He wrote 7 Days in May, which was a fictional book about a military coup, just like 9/11 was, because Muslims didn't blow up the towers or blow up my civil rights case. Americans did. America, London, Germany, and France, and Israel did this. And I know this firsthand. Before they blew up the towers, my next door neighbor was Tim McVeigh, and they framed him in a Ryder truck, and Mitch Ryder is my family. And he wrote the songs Elvis sings. My great aunt Gardner, Ava Gardner, married Frank Sinatra. Sinatra and Ted Kennedy made me a publisher in Foley Federal Court on Broadway in New York at ASCAP and BMI. Prior to them blowing up the Twin Towers, they held all the receipts and my FBI records. I had FBI records in Building 7 because they tried to frame me for Jimmy Hoffa's murder. And other things going on Broadway in New York. They tried to tell me I robbed a bank. I never robbed a bank. I had 7 kids in a car driving down I-75. They pulled me over with guns drawn on my kids and told me I robbed a bank. I was on the way to a doctor with one of the kids who needed surgery. My whole life is like this, and I'm not in any media, but the FBI detained me getting out of my work truck 5 hours after Hoffa disappeared at the Maka Sly Fox. And I'm not in any book, any movie. I'm not mentioned anywhere. And I was introduced to Whitey in The Outlaws 2 months before they buried Hoffa under my horse. I bought Miller a house. Miller wrote a book, said he murdered Hoffa. Miller wasn't anywhere near Hoffa on the day he disappeared. And I know these things firsthand. And all media pretends I don't exist. There's a reason this book should conclude my history book, because President Kennedy's, John F. Kennedy, and Bobby Kennedy's own press secretary in the White House wrote a book prior to stealing my trademark and pointing me out to the entire world with my next door neighbor, Nagy Cement, and my doctor, Bailey, Charles Bailey. They wrote 7 Days in May. It was about a military coup that they planned as they murdered the Kennedy family.
Amazing, yeah.
And this was planned,
that makes a lot of sense.
This was planned as I was born, because George Washington, you know this, you were a worker at the museum where George Washington's sword was handed to my family, Mr. Putnam, who was married to my family, the Fuller family, before we were a country. And there's John Eastman with Trump, Osborne and Eastman and Stone, who all tortured me as I grew up, planned 9/11 with Bush and Giuliani after they stole my entire life. They stole 28,000 multi-million-dollar entertainment contracts from my federal license in Foley Federal Court. And Muslims did not blow up the towers. The Americans who stole my life blew up the towers.
Yeah, that's right.
And Osborne comes from London. So does Hall. Mick Jagger married Hall.
That's right, yeah.
This is the same family that kidnapped me when I was 4 and murdered my twin. And then I was marked by the Beatles as they came across in '63. As they murdered the Kennedy family, stole my trademark, and wrote 7 Days in May.
Right.
3 people on Durham Street who actually knew me. And then Barr, I live next door to Roseanne Barr, and she works for Senator Graham, who hid the murder of my twin and my kidnap on the day Admiral Byrd was murdered. And you know, we've already discussed many times, Admiral Byrd confronted Eisenhower about illegal guns being sold after World War II, and they murdered him that day. Cut my
Yeah.
father's hands off at Divco, where he made milk trucks for Twin Pines.
Uh-huh.
Kidnapped me and my twin with Camille Sirhan, all on the same day in 1957.
And there's your 5-7. That's what you meant to say earlier. 5-7, 7 days in May. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my
57. Yeah.
yeah. January, February, March, April, May, 5-7. Yeah. I
Yeah.
said my birthday, 4-7. No, it was my kidnap, 5-7.
I knew what you meant.
So
And I think I posted earlier today about on Facebook about how Putin pointed all this out about who really destroyed the World Trade Centers when he shot the journalist Hall in Ukraine.
yeah, I asked him to point me out
Mm-hmm.
long time ago online. I'm talking to him.
Yeah.
His reply at that time is he's saying on Blueberry Hill
Mm-hmm.
by Chuck Berry, as I worked for Chuck. And Chuck raped my first wife, Nancy. They chained her to a bed and did what's known as a train on her in a Mount Clemens hotel room. Chuck did that.
Well, now it makes sense because you had his guitar at one point, right?
Right. I bought his guitar from Elvis Presley's in Tennessee or Kentucky from Elvis Presley's pawn shop there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's pictures of me using Chuck Berry's guitar.
Yeah.
Karen Nelson, Ricky Nelson's family, she was chained to a tree on Belle Isle by 5 black men. They kicked her teeth out and brutally raped her. She lived through that, but then they murdered her Christmas Day a few years later. That was my first murdered wife.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't murdered yet. She wasn't murdered yet. And we weren't married yet.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had planned the wedding for the following week. She was murdered Christmas Day. And then when I went back to Oakland County and I was sitting in Al Brooks Patterson's office, they murdered 5 of my kids there in 2 states as I sat in Al Brooks Patterson's office.
Yeah. Years later in 2017.
And
Yeah.
Buttigieg, that gay mayor in Indiana, they murdered 2 of my kids in Indiana, where I was staying at a house there with Pam, who was supposed to tell my truth on her 9/11 truther site, but she never did.
No.
And then you got the gay mayor. And then I went from her house to Michigan. While I was in Michigan, they murdered 3 of my kids in Michigan, and they murdered 2 in Indiana, where Buttigieg is from, on the same day. And there's no news about any of these, and they're not called murders. Just like my wives were dismembered. My wife's ears were cut off, a leg was cut off. Another had been dismembered, and none of these murders are written up as murders. They're written up as natural causes. Somebody cut their own ears off as they naturally died, Greg. Have you ever heard of a woman cutting her leg off as she naturally died? And
No.
they wrote natural causes on all of my family's murders.
Yeah,
My
I know.
mother's entire family was murdered leaving church on Clinton Road. And her family built Hollywood. And you know this. We made videos about this.
Yeah.
So they planned 9/11 in my life because all the presidents on money grew up with me, and I'm related to the presidents on the money. And right now at this time here, I live with the Indians who own Mount Rushmore land, and I'm related to the presidents on Mount Rushmore. And they planned 9/11 around my life as I was born. And Kodak Stone, Hall, and Osborne. Wallace and Long did this.
Isn't that amazing how Eastman and Stone are Trump's friends?
No, they were trying to steal the White House.
Right.
And Joe Biden is no better. Biden was Obama's vice president as Obama murdered two of my wives with his journalist, Major Tom Garrett, and Barbara Walters' family of CBS. When they murdered my wife, an attorney in Johnson City, and Johnson called my family's home as they murdered 5 Duncan kids next door to my home on the day they murdered Kennedy. And you got this picture, and then they gave the world Arsenic and Old Lace from Agatha Christie. And I'm the Christie family, but Agatha Christie's real name is Miller, and I bought Miller a house. And you see how this all fits in with Kennedy's murder, Hoffa's murder.
Yeah, perfectly.
After they hid me in all media, stole my publishing, IRS, and my birth name, they blew up the Twin Towers with the receipts in the Civil Rights Building at the Pentagon with my civil rights case. And you see, I spent years with this civil rights case. They stole my entire life in a federal publishing license from me.
Yeah.
As I worked with Ted Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and even John F. Kennedy was talking to me. I was a publisher on the front page of the Chicago Tribune as they murdered the Kennedys. And you know this, Greg.
Yeah, he was talking to the newspaper publishers.
We'll cut this short here. This should conclude the history book you wrote on me. 9/11 was planned before the Twin Towers were built. And I don't think it. I know it.
Clearly.
And then the same people that planned it tried to steal the White House when they ran against Joe Biden. And you know, the drug trade I stopped, the illegal gun and drug trade the CIA and Senate were running, was on the property I bought from Donald Trump's tax attorney, Mr. Mazar. And then they threw me in jail for a year, over a year, kidnapped and raped my daughter. And they made movie stars in Hollywood out of all the drug dealers. And all of this is truth, Greg. And this is as Timothy McVeigh was coming to my property buying LSD prior to Oklahoma bombing. Now, we'll leave it at this. And you're welcome to post this.
I was thinking also, we were talking about Hall, and today the news is running with a story about Scott Hall, is the guy who was the first to turn himself in for collaborating with Trump over the
Hall family. Daryl Hall's family was molesting me, torturing me in Governor Osborne's basement.
Yeah.
When I was 4 years old. And then they went on to give the world the Eagles. And anybody can look into one of the Eagles' brothers was murdering little kids all over the country and grown men and women and throwing pieces of their bodies at every concert. And he got caught doing that. And then I sobered up Joe Walsh at St. Anne's, my church, where I went to be a priest. I went to school to be a priest at St. Anne's. And the Eagles came from another Catholic church down the road on 4th Street. And I was kidnapped at 4. Then the Twin Towers were built. They stole my life after murdering kids all over the place.
And see, it still hasn't stopped to this day, because we see, we've made videos about this before, but Hall's handed the loaded gun to attack Baldwin on the set of Rust. As you said, that's another attack on the Baldwin family from Hall.
I saved Sue Baldwin from being raped by the renegades and the outlaws.
Yeah.
when
Yeah,
I was, when I was 15, 14 years old.
Mhm.
And then that's the same people who dug a hole and helped the state policeman bury Jimmy Hoffa in Michigan under my horse and a goat.
Yeah.
And they were all witches. And then that ties in with Osborne and the witch trials going all the way back to the original colonies, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And they planned 9/11. Greg, this was a plan on the day I was born. And they have attacked every generation of my family and murdered us since 1776. And there's no lie in this.
Yeah. Osborne was part of the witch trials
My my
with
my
Cotton
great
Mather.
my great grandmother, her family was with Lincoln as the actor Bush shot him. I was working with 5 Kennedy family members as they were murdered. This is not coincidence.
Right.
And then
Right. Obviously not.
look who was lying to help Trump steal the White House, because they're very afraid of my truth. And this is all truth.
Hmm.
And they have murdered kids all around me for 70 years.
Hmm.
They just murdered 5 of my kids last year. As L. Brooks Patterson died. And you know this, Greg.
Yeah.
Let's cut this here. You got anything else you want to say?
Nah, we'll stop it there.
This should be the last chapter in my history book. Tie it all together.
Hmm.
It's truth.
Oh yeah.
Fletcher Knebbel, Kennedy's press secretary, before using my stolen trademark with a red line in the sand under it, with my doctor and my next door neighbor on Durham Street, wrote 7 Days in May. It's about a fake military coup. Gee, and Kennedy served in the Navy, didn't he?
Yeah, sure did.
7 Days in May was about a military coup that started on a boat, if I remember it correctly.
I'll have to buy that one.
Bye, Greg.
Bye.